So today I'd like to talk to you about a common evidence-based treatment called cognitive behavioral therapy. And what I thought might be helpful to the viewer is just to take you through how we as clinicians who practice CBT conceptualize cognitive behavioral therapy in the context of how people work. So I'm going to take you through the mechanism of how people work, and then hopefully at home you guys can follow along and use your own examples to fill in the gaps. A good way to begin to think about just people in general, or at least from a cognitive behavioral point of view, is this triangle. And the triangle really represents thoughts, feelings, body sensations, and it's what's called bidirectional model. Bidirectional model simply implies that each part of the triangle affects the other. So let's take a simple example. Let's talk about anxiety or worry. A person feels scared. They have worry thoughts, and they have predictable physiological or body sensations, such as heart palpitations, sweaty palms, tension, dizziness. Sometimes I need to go to the bathroom, right? Do you see how the experience is emotional, cognitive, or thoughts, and physical, right? All putting it all together is, let's say, what we call anxiety. Now, that's what happens within the individual. So let me kind of take you through of why a particular experience is happening for an individual. Typically, there's a trigger to this thought, feeling, and a physical sensation. Now, a trigger could be external, and an external trigger could be something like a situation, an event, or another person, or an internal. Internal trigger is something like an urge, let's say an urge to eat or to drink, an impulse, for example, like a sexual impulse, a memory, something from your past, or a fantasy that will trigger a particular thought, feeling, and a physical sensation. Now, once a trigger is out there, it triggers a thought, a feeling, a physical sensation, then triggers a particular external behavior. And the behavior is really in two different ways: a specific action, like going somewhere, coming somewhere, leaving a party, coming to a party, or verbiage, or basically what you say. So instead of an action or a movement, you just say something back. So let's go through a very simple example. A trigger could potentially be at a social gathering. If an individual is, let's say, struggling with social anxiety, a person will typically feel scared or fearful. That individual will have very predictable thoughts like, potentially people don't like me, I feel embarrassed, I'm not going to feel accepted in this circle of friends, and they have predictable body sensations such as physiological tension, dizziness, heart palpitations, inability to come up with a particular phrasing that they want, or needing to go to the bathroom. That internal experience is likely to create a particular behavior. Either that person's decide to avoid the situation and leave, or say something to the other individuals like, I'm not interested in engaging in a conversation at this point in time. Typically, in social anxiety, as an example, people typically leave big social gathering. If you are thinking of this as a computer, you may want to relate to it as an input, meaning a trigger, an output, what does the person actually do, and as a processing unit. Oftentimes, when we get triggered for a particular unpleasant experience, we use the behavior to manipulate or to change the trigger in order to improve our emotional state. So just going back to our social anxiety example, when an individual finds him or herself in a social situation, they leave the situation. Another way of saying manipulate or change the trigger in order to reduce the feelings of fear or feeling scared. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy, targeting not only manipulation of the trigger by changing behavior, but also looking at the thoughts and the feelings and the physical sensations that are contributing to one's behavior. Again, trigger, thought, feeling, physical sensation, and a behavior. If you can think of an example in your life, and I always encourage people I work with to consider simple examples from their personal life of how they can begin to monitor what triggered a particular emotional experience or a cognitive experience, and what did they actually do with the experience? Did they avoid the situation? Did they say something back in order to change it? Or were they able to be mindful and aware of their thoughts and feelings and begin to work within the internal process of themselves rather than just changing the environment? How to do that is really the process of cognitive behavioral therapy. Thanks so much for joining.